The day a disabled veteran with a walking cane humiliated an entire elite sniper regiment started like any other training session at Camp Ridgemont. None of us could have imagined that the woman we dismissed and mocked for her physical limitations would demonstrate marksmanship skills so extraordinary they would rewrite everything we thought we knew about precision shooting and force us to confront our own arrogance in the most humbling way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Montana morning air was crisp and thin at 7,000 feet elevation. As Sergeant First Class Derek Stone surveyed his domain from the observation tower of Camp Ridgemont's precision marksmanship range, below him stretched what many considered the most challenging sniper training facility in the United States military, a sprawling complex of mountain terrain that had been carefully engineered to test the limits of human marksmanship capability. Derek took pride in running the elite mountain sniper division, and rightfully so. At 29 years old, he had earned his position through a combination of exceptional shooting skills, tactical brilliance, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. That had made him the youngest sergeant first class in the division's history. His own sniper record was legendary, minus 247 confirmed kills across 3 deployments in Afghanistan, with shots recorded at distances that most marksmen considered theoretical rather than practical. Derek's real pride wasn't in his personal achievements. It was in the 4 elite snipers he had molded into what he genuinely believed was the finest precision shooting team the military had ever produced. Each member of his team had been hand-selected from hundreds of candidates, and together they had achieved a level of coordination and effectiveness that had become the stuff of military legend. Corporal Nathan Blake was the team's primary shooter, a 26-year-old former Marine whose confidence bordered on arrogance, but was backed up by skills that justified every bit of his swagger. Nathan had grown up hunting in the forests of Oregon, where he'd learned to read wind patterns and judge distances with an intuitive accuracy that couldn't be taught in any classroom. His military record included shots at ranges exceeding 1,200 meters in combat conditions, and he had never missed a target during qualification exercises. Nathan's motto was simple: if I can see it, I can hit it, and if I can hit it, it's dead. Private Zoe Martinez, at 23, served as the team's spotter and technical specialist. Her background in engineering had given her an almost supernatural ability to calculate ballistic trajectories, account for environmental variables, and predict target movement patterns. Zoe could factor wind speed, humidity, temperature, altitude, and even the Coriolis effect into her calculations faster than most people could work a calculator. She carried a tablet loaded with ballistic software that she had personally modified, and her technical expertise had helped the team achieve accuracy rates that consistently exceeded military standards by significant margins. The youngest member of the team was Private Kevin Park, barely 20 years old, but possessing the kind of natural shooting instinct that veteran instructors recognized as truly exceptional. Kevin had joined the military straight out of high school, where he had been a champion marksman on his school's competitive shooting team. Despite his youth, he had an uncanny ability to remain calm under pressure and to notice details that others missed. Kevin's role was as the team's secondary shooter and reconnaissance specialist, and his fresh perspective often provided insights that more experienced soldiers overlooked. Finally, there was Private Rachel Turner, 24, whose competitive nature and relentless drive for perfection made her the team's designated challenger. Rachel had grown up in a military family and had been shooting competitively since she was 12 years old. She pushed every member of the team to exceed their previous performance, never satisfied with good enough and always demanding that they reach for the next level of excellence. Her aggressive pursuit of perfection had helped elevate the entire team's capabilities, and her tactical knowledge was comprehensive enough that she frequently served as an assistant instructor for newer recruits. Together, These 4 snipers had achieved a level of success that had drawn attention from the highest levels of military command. They had won every inter-service marksmanship competition they had entered, often by margins that embarrassed their competitors. Their training scores consistently broke facility records, and their techniques had been studied and adopted by sniper programs. Across all branches of the military, the morning's training exercise was typical of the challenges Derek designed for his elite team. He had set up targets at distances ranging from 800 to 1,500 meters across the mountain terrain, positioned to test every aspect of advanced marksmanship. Some targets were partially concealed behind rock formations, requiring precise shot placement through narrow windows. Others were positioned at extreme elevation differences, demanding complex calculations to account for the ballistic effects of shooting uphill and downhill. Still others were designed to test the team's ability to engage multiple targets in rapid succession while maintaining pinpoint accuracy. "All right, people," Derek called out as his team assembled at the firing line, their equipment perfectly organized and their weapons meticulously maintained. "Today we're running the Alpine Challenge course. Zoe, I want environmental calculations updated every 15 minutes. Nathan, you're primary on targets 1 through 6. Rachel, you'll take 7 through 12. Kevin, you're floating between positions and calling wind corrections." The team moved with the fluid coordination of a unit that had trained together for months. Zoe immediately began setting up her spotting scope and tablet, her fingers flying across the ballistic software as she calculated initial firing solutions. Nathan chambered around with the casual confidence of someone who had performed the action thousands of times, his eye already scanning the distant targets through his scope. Rachel assumed her firing position with textbook precision, every aspect of her stance optimized for maximum stability and accuracy. Kevin moved between the team members, his sharp eyes reading wind indicators and environmental conditions across the complex terrain. Derek watched his team prepare with the satisfaction of an instructor who knew he was observing true excellence in action. These 4 soldiers represented the culmination of everything he had learned about marksmanship training, tactical coordination, and military precision. They were the best of the best, and they knew it. "Range is hot," Derek announced, his voice carrying across the mountain air. "Engage when ready." What followed was a demonstration of marksmanship that would have impressed even the most experienced military observers. Nathan's first shot rang out across the valley, followed immediately by the distinctive ping of a bullet striking steel at extreme range. Rachel's shot came seconds later, another perfect hit. Zoe's voice provided a steady stream of technical updates, wind holding steady at 7 miles per hour from the southwest. Temperature rising to 47 degrees, humidity at 23%. Kevin moved between positions like a dancer, his eyes constantly scanning for changes in environmental conditions that might affect his teammates' shots. His calls were precise and timely. Wind shift, right to left, 6 miles per hour. Thermal rising off the ridgeline, adjust elevation 2 clicks down. For 20 minutes, the team performed with machine-like precision. Every shot found its mark. Every calculation proved accurate. Every tactical decision was executed flawlessly. By the time Derek called "cease fire," they had achieved a perfect score on one of the most challenging courses ever designed for military snipers. As the team began cleaning their weapons and recording their scores, Nathan couldn't resist expressing the confidence that had made him legendary among his peers. "You know what, Sarge?" Nathan said, his voice carrying the easy arrogance of someone who had never failed at anything that mattered. "I'm starting to think we need more challenging courses. This stuff is getting too easy." Derek had to admit that Nathan had a point. The team's performance had exceeded even his own expectations, and he was beginning to wonder if they had reached the limits of what conventional training could teach them. "Maybe you're right, Blake," Derek replied, making notes on his clipboard. "I'll talk to Colonel Brooks about designing some new challenges, But don't get too comfortable. The moment you think you've learned everything there is to know about shooting is the moment someone comes along to remind you how much you still don't understand. None of them could have imagined how prophetic those words would prove to be, or that the lesson in humility would come from a source none of them would have ever expected. It was during the afternoon training session, 3 days after Nathan's boastful declaration about needing more challenging courses, that she appeared. Derek was running his team through close-range precision exercises when Kevin, who had the sharpest eyes of the group, noticed her first. "Sarge," Kevin called out, lowering his rifle and pointing toward the access road that wound through the pine trees toward their range. "We've got a visitor." Derek turned to look where Kevin was pointing, and saw a figure walking slowly up the gravel path. Even at a distance, there was something unusual about the person's gait, a careful, deliberate movement that spoke of someone compensating for a physical limitation. As the figure drew closer, Derek could make out more details that only deepened his confusion about why anyone would be approaching their restricted training area. The woman appeared to be in her late 40s, with gray and brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wearing civilian clothes that had seen better days, faded jeans, a worn flannel shirt, and hiking boots that looked like they had covered many miles. But it was the walking cane that immediately drew everyone's attention. Made of polished wood with a simple handle, she leaned on it with each step, clearly relying on it for support, rather than using it as a mere accessory. Nathan was the first to voice what everyone was thinking, though he did so with his characteristic lack of tact. "What's someone's grandmother doing wandering around a military firing range?" he asked loud enough for his teammates to hear. "Did she get lost looking for the visitor center?" Zoe, who despite her technical expertise had never quite learned to filter her thoughts, added her own observation. "She's got to be at least 50, and look at that limp. Probably shouldn't even be hiking around out here. Someone should call base security." Rachel, always competitive and protective of their training time, was more direct. "Whatever she wants, we don't have time for interruptions. We've got qualification scores to maintain and records to break." But Kevin, who had grown up in a military family and understood the importance of respecting civilians, felt a nagging sense that something about the situation didn't add up. The woman's movements were careful but confident, and despite her obvious physical limitation, she carried herself with a kind of quiet dignity that suggested she wasn't lost or confused. Derek walked toward the range barrier as the woman approached, his military bearing automatically asserting itself. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this is a restricted military training area. Civilians need special authorization and an escort to be in this section of the base." The woman stopped at the barrier and looked up at Derek with steady brown eyes that held a depth of experience he couldn't quite place. When she spoke, her voice was calm and measured, carrying just a hint of authority that seemed out of place with her unassuming appearance. "I understand this is a training facility," she said simply. "I was hoping I might observe your exercises for a few minutes. It's been a long time since I've seen precision marksmanship training." Derek felt a moment of confusion. Most civilian requests to observe military training came through official channels with paperwork and advance notice. This woman's casual approach suggested either ignorance of proper procedures or a level of confidence that implied she had reasons for being here that he didn't understand. Nathan, who had never been known for his diplomatic skills, decided to insert himself into the conversation. "Lady, this isn't a public shooting range. This is where the best snipers in the military train. We're working on exercises that are way beyond anything a civilian would understand." The woman turned her attention to Nathan, and for just a moment, Derek caught a glimpse of something in her expression, not annoyance or offense, but a kind of quiet assessment, as if she were evaluating Nathan's character and finding it wanting. "See," she said simply, "and what kind of exercises are those?" Zoe, always eager to demonstrate her technical knowledge, jumped into the explanation. were running precision shots at distances from 800 to 1,500 meters across variable terrain, with environmental factors that require constant ballistic recalculation. It's not exactly something you'd see at a county fair shooting booth. Rachel added her own contribution to what was rapidly becoming a display of collective arrogance. Our team holds facility records at every distance. We've never had a missed shot during qualification, and we regularly outperform military standards by margins that most people would consider impossible. The woman listened to their boasting with the same quiet attention she had given Derek's initial explanation. When they finished, she nodded thoughtfully and made a request that caught everyone off guard. "Would it be possible for me to take a shot?" she asked. "Just one. I'd be happy to pay for the ammunition." The silence that followed her request was broken by Nathan's bark of laughter. "You want a what? Lady, do you have any idea what kind of weapons we're using here? These aren't hunting rifles. They're precision military systems that require years of training to operate safely." Zoe's technical mind immediately began cataloging the obvious problems with the request. The ballistic calculations alone would take hours to explain. And that's assuming you have any background in advanced marksmanship, which, no offense, seems unlikely. Rachel was more blunt. "Ma'am, these exercises are designed for elite military snipers. The targets we're engaging require skills that take years to develop. I don't think you understand what you're asking." But Kevin found himself studying the woman more carefully. There was something about the way she had made the request, not pleading or argumentative, but with a quiet confidence that suggested she might know more about marksmanship than her appearance indicated. He noticed that despite her walking cane and civilian clothes, she held herself with the kind of posture that spoke of military training, and her eyes had the sharp, observant quality he associated with experienced shooters. Derek found himself in an awkward position. Military protocol clearly dictated that he should politely decline the request and escort the woman off the range. But there was something in her demeanor that made him hesitate, a quality of quiet authority that suggested she wasn't just some random civilian who had wandered onto their training area. "Ma'am," Derek said carefully, "I appreciate your interest, but our insurance and safety protocols don't allow for civilian participation in live fire exercises. Perhaps I could arrange for you to observe from the safety area while we complete our training." The woman accepted his response with the same calm dignity she had shown throughout the conversation. "I understand your position, Sergeant. Thank you for your time." As she turned to leave, Nathan couldn't resist one final display of superiority. "Maybe try the civilian shooting range in town," he called after her. "They've got some nice .22 rifles that might be more your speed." The woman paused without turning around, and for just a moment Derek caught a glimpse of something in her posture that reminded him of his own instructors, the kind of stillness that comes from absolute confidence in one's abilities. "Thank you for the suggestion," she said quietly, and continued walking back toward the access road. As she disappeared among the pine trees, the team returned to their exercises, but Derek found himself distracted by the encounter. There had been something about the woman that didn't match her appearance, a quality of calm professionalism that suggested she was more familiar with military environments than she had let on. "Weird," Nathan commented as he returned to his firing position. "Some people really don't understand what elite training looks like." But Kevin continued to watch the tree line where the woman had disappeared, his instincts telling him that they had just dismissed someone who might have surprised them all. 2 days later, Victoria Harrison returned to the range during the early morning hours, when the mountain air was still crisp and the targets were barely visible through the dawn mist. This time, however, she didn't approach through the main access road. Instead, she appeared at the range barrier as if she had materialized from the forest itself, carrying something wrapped in weathered canvas that immediately caught Derek's attention. The team was running their weekly qualification exercise, a grueling test that required them to engage targets at maximum range under time pressure. It was the kind of challenge that separated elite snipers from ordinary marksmen, and Derek's team was performing with their usual flawless precision. Nathan had just completed a series of shots at 1,400 meters that would have impressed any military observer when Kevin noticed their unexpected visitor. "Sarge," Kevin called out quietly, "she's back." Derek looked up from his scoring clipboard to see the woman standing patiently at the safety barrier, her walking cane planted firmly in the gravel and that same canvas-wrapped bundle tucked under her free arm. This time her presence seemed less accidental and more purposeful, as if she had been waiting for exactly the right moment to return. Nathan, who was feeling particularly confident after his exceptional shooting performance, noticed her arrival with obvious irritation. "Great. It's the hiking lady again. Didn't we already explain that this isn't a tourist attraction?" Zoe lowered her spotting scope and shook her head in disbelief. "Some people just don't take hints. Should we call base security this time?" Rachel, who was preparing for her own qualification run, was more direct in her annoyance. "Ma'am, we explained that this is a restricted area. You really shouldn't be here." But the woman seemed unperturbed by their obvious displeasure. She waited patiently until Derek approached the barrier, then spoke with the same calm authority that had characterized their previous encounter. "Sergeant, I apologize for returning without permission, but I have a proposition that might interest your team." Derek felt his curiosity override his irritation. There was something in the woman's tone that suggested this wasn't going to be another simple request to observe their training. "What kind of proposition, ma'am?" Victoria hefted the canvas bundle slightly, and Derek could see that whatever was wrapped inside had the distinctive shape and weight of a rifle. "I'd like to make a wager with your snipers. If I can outshoot your best marksman on your most difficult course, I win the right to share some knowledge that might improve their training. If I fail, I'll leave and never return." The silence that followed her proposal was broken by Nathan's incredulous laughter. "You want to challenge me to a shooting contest? Lady, I don't think you understand what you're suggesting." Zoe's analytical mind immediately began processing the absurdity of the situation. "Ma'am, with all due respect, our qualification course requires engaging targets at distances exceeding 1,200 meters. The ballistic calculations alone would be beyond most civilian capabilities." Rachel was characteristically blunt. "This is ridiculous. We're elite military snipers. You're a middle-aged woman with a walking cane. There's no contest here." But Kevin found himself studying the woman more intently than before. The way she held the canvas bundle suggested familiarity with firearms, and her proposal had been made with the kind of confidence that came from absolute certainty about one's abilities. Derek found himself facing a decision that went against every protocol he had been trained to follow. Allowing a civilian to participate in live fire exercises was a serious breach of regulations that could end his career. But there was something about the woman's quiet confidence that intrigued him, and his team's recent complaints about needing more challenging exercises echoed in his mind. "What exactly are you proposing?" Derek asked carefully. Victoria gestured toward the qualification course that Derek had set up for his team's testing. "Your most difficult challenge. Same targets, same conditions, same standards. If I can match or exceed your best shooter's performance, you listen to what I have to teach. If I fail, you never see me again." Nathan's competitive instincts immediately took over. "You know what? Fine, I'll take that bet. But when you embarrass yourself out there, don't expect any sympathy." Zoe pulled out her tablet and began running calculations. The current course requires engaging 12 targets at distances from 800 to 1,500 meters across variable elevation. Wind conditions are currently favorable, but that could change rapidly in these mountains. Rachel looked at Derek with obvious concern. "Sarge, this is crazy. We can't let some random civilian use military weapons on our range. The liability alone could get us all court-martialed. Derek wrestled with the decision for several long moments. Every aspect of his training told him to politely decline and escort the woman off the base. But something in her demeanor suggested that this wasn't a random civilian making an impulsive challenge. The way she carried herself, the confidence in her voice, the familiarity with which she handled what was obviously a rifle case, it all pointed to someone with more experience than her appearance suggested. "What's in the case?" Derek asked. Victoria unwrapped the canvas to reveal a rifle that made Derek's breath catch in his throat. It was an M24 sniper weapon system, but one that had clearly seen extensive use. The stock was worn smooth by countless hours of handling. The barrel showed the kind of wear that came from thousands of rounds fired in harsh conditions, and the entire weapon had the patina of age and hard use that spoke of serious combat experience. "Where did you get that rifle?" Derek asked, his voice carrying a new note of respect. "It was issued to me a long time ago," Victoria replied simply. "I've maintained it myself ever since." Nathan studied the weapon with professional interest, noting details that suggested this wasn't some surplus rifle purchased at an army surplus store. The modifications were subtle but professional: a custom trigger, precision bedding, and a scope mount that had been professionally installed. This was the rifle of someone who had used it for serious work. "That's a real sniper rifle," Kevin observed quietly, "not some civilian hunting gun." Zoe was running calculations on her tablet, but her expression showed growing confusion. "Ma'am, that weapon system requires specific training and certification to operate. Where exactly did you learn to use it?" Victoria shouldered the rifle with movements that were both practiced and natural, checking the action with the kind of automatic precision that spoke of muscle memory developed over years of use. "I learned to use it where lives depended on accuracy." Derek felt a chill run down his spine as he recognized the implications of her statement. This wasn't just someone who had picked up shooting as a hobby. This was someone who had used a sniper rifle in combat conditions, where missing meant more than losing points on a score sheet. "Ma'am," Derek said carefully, "I need to ask about your background before I can authorize this." Victoria met his eyes directly, and for the first time Derek saw something in her expression that made him understand why Kevin had been so convinced there was more to her story than appeared on the surface. "My name is Victoria Harrison, call sign Deadshot. I served 12 years as a precision marksman before a mortar attack in Iraq ended my career. This rifle has 127 confirmed kills, and I haven't missed a shot that mattered in 15 years of active duty." The range fell completely silent as the implications of her words sank in. This wasn't some civilian who had wandered onto their training area. This was a veteran sniper whose combat record might exceed their own. Despite her unassuming appearance and physical limitations, Nathan's arrogant confidence wavered for the first time since Derek had known him. "You're saying you're a veteran sniper?" "I'm saying I'm ready to show you what real precision shooting looks like, if you're brave enough to find out whether everything you think you know about marksmanship is actually true." Derek realized that his team was about to face a challenge that would test more than their shooting skills. They were about to discover whether their confidence was justified, or whether they still had more to learn than they had ever imagined. The morning sun had burned through the mountain mist by the time Derek made his decision. Against every regulation he had been trained to follow, against the protests of his team, and against his own better judgment, he found himself authorizing Victoria Harrison to attempt their most challenging qualification course. "All right," Derek announced, his voice carrying across the range with an authority that silenced any further objections. "Ms. Harrison will attempt the Alpha course under full qualification standards. Same targets, same time limits, same scoring criteria we use for military assessment. Nathan's confidence had been shaken by Victoria's revelation of her military background, but his competitive nature wouldn't allow him to back down. Fine by me. But when this is over, I want an explanation of how someone with a walking cane thinks she can outshoot an elite sniper team. Victoria ignored Nathan's challenge and began preparing her equipment with the methodical precision of someone who had performed these rituals thousands of times. She removed a small notebook from her jacket pocket and began recording environmental conditions, wind speed, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, with the same attention to detail that Zoe brought to her high-tech calculations. Zoe watched this analog approach with obvious skepticism. "Ma'am, I can provide you with precise ballistic calculations from my software. The environmental variables alone require constant updates for accuracy at these ranges." Victoria looked up from her notebook with a slight smile. "Thank you, but I prefer to do my own calculations. Technology is helpful, but it can fail when you need it most. What's between your ears is more reliable than what's on your screen." Rachel stepped forward to examine the qualification course that Derek had laid out. 12 targets positioned across the mountain terrain at distances ranging from 800 meters to the maximum range of 1,500 meters. Some targets were partially concealed behind rocky outcroppings. Others were positioned at extreme elevation angles that required complex ballistic adjustments. The course was designed to test every aspect of advanced marksmanship under field conditions. "Ma'am," Rachel said with grudging professional respect, "this course has a 90% failure rate among experienced military snipers. Even our team considers it extremely challenging." Victoria shouldered her worn M24 and moved to the firing line with a gait that accommodated her walking cane but showed no hesitation or uncertainty. "I appreciate the warning. Shall we begin?" Derek positioned himself at the observation post with his spotting scope while his team arranged themselves to observe what they expected to be a humbling demonstration of civilian overconfidence. Kevin set up his own scope, his curiosity about Victoria's background making him more interested in studying her technique than in watching her fail. "Range is hot," Derek announced. "Engage targets in numerical order. Time limit is 30 minutes. For all 12 targets." What happened next would be discussed and analyzed for years afterward by every sniper who witnessed it. Victoria settled into her firing position with movements that spoke of muscle memory developed over decades of practice. Despite her walking cane, her shooting stance was textbook perfect, stable, comfortable, sustainable. She made no adjustments to her scope, consulted no charts or calculations, simply raised her rifle and acquired her first target at 800 meters. The shot broke with the distinctive crack of a precision rifle, and through his spotting scope, Derek saw the target ring with a perfect center hit. But instead of celebrating or even pausing to confirm the shot, Victoria immediately transitioned to target number 2 at 950 meters, adjusted for the increased range, and fired again. Another perfect hit. Nathan watched through his own scope, his expression shifting from skeptical amusement to professional interest. "Okay, those were decent shots, but the real challenges start at the longer ranges." Victoria continued methodically through the course, each shot placed with mechanical precision. Target 3 at 1,100 meters, center hit. Target 4 at 1,250 meters, positioned behind a rocky outcropping that allowed only a narrow window for engagement. Another perfect shot. Target 5 angled uphill at maximum elevation, requiring complex ballistic calculations for the trajectory change. Dead center. Zoe stared at her tablet in disbelief. She's not even using calculations. How is she compensating for all the environmental variables? But it was Target 6 that truly began to separate Victoria's performance from anything the team had ever witnessed. Positioned at 1,350 meters across a valley with swirling wind patterns that changed direction every few seconds, This target had defeated experienced snipers, who spent 20 minutes trying to time their shots between wind shifts. Victoria observed the target for exactly 15 seconds, reading wind indicators that were invisible to the others, then fired without hesitation. The bullet traveled for nearly 3 seconds before striking the target with the same precision as her previous shots. "That's impossible," Rachel whispered. "The wind patterns in that valley are completely unpredictable." Kevin studied Victoria through his scope, noting details that his teammates were missing in their focus on the targets. "Look at how she's reading the wind. She's not just watching flags and indicators. She's reading the entire environment, grass movement, thermal patterns, even dust drift." Targets 7 through 10 fell with the same mechanical precision. Each shot placed exactly where it needed to be. Each engagement completed without wasted time or unnecessary adjustments. Victoria moved through the course like a machine programmed for perfection. But Derek could see that this wasn't mechanical repetition. It was the result of understanding the science of ballistics so completely that complex calculations had become instinctive. Target 11 was positioned at the maximum range of 1,500 meters, partially concealed behind multiple obstacles that created a shot window, barely larger than the target itself. Most snipers required multiple attempts to even locate the target through their scopes, much less hit it. Victoria raised her rifle, acquired the target, and fired in one fluid motion. The shot rang true, striking dead center, but it was her approach to target 12 that truly demonstrated capabilities that went beyond conventional marksmanship training. This target was positioned at 1,400 meters, but was only intermittently visible as wind-blown vegetation periodically blocked the line of sight. Successful engagement required timing the shot for the brief moments when the target was exposed. Victoria waited with the patience of a hunter, her rifle steady, her breathing controlled. For nearly 2 minutes she held position, reading patterns in the vegetation movement that allowed her to predict when the target would be exposed. When the moment came, she fired instantly, the bullet threading through a gap in the swaying vegetation to strike the target perfectly. Total time elapsed 18 minutes, 37 seconds. Total shots fired, 12. Total hits, 12 perfect center strikes. The range fell into stunned silence as the implications of what they had just witnessed began to sink in. Derek lowered his spotting scope, his hands actually trembling as he tried to process what he had just observed. Nathan stared at the targets through his own scope, his voice barely audible. Every single shot was perfect. Zoe's tablet showed calculations that should have required constant updates and adjustments, but Victoria had made every shot without referring to any external data. She didn't use any ballistic software. She didn't even have a rangefinder. How did she calculate all those variables? Rachel was examining the shot groupings through a high-powered scope, shaking her head in disbelief. The precision isn't just good, it's inhuman. Each shot is placed within millimeters of the exact center. Victoria lowered her rifle and began the process of making it safe, her movements showing the same calm professionalism she had displayed throughout the exercise. She turned to face Derek and his team, and for the first time he could see satisfaction in her expression. Not arrogance or pride, but the quiet satisfaction of a professional who had just demonstrated mastery of her craft. "I believe that completes your qualification course," Victoria said simply. "Are you ready to listen to what I have to teach?" Derek realized that everything he thought he knew about marksmanship had just been called into question by a woman with a walking cane, who had just demonstrated shooting skills that exceeded anything he had ever witnessed in 15 years of military service. The aftermath of Victoria's demonstration was characterized not by the respect and curiosity that her performance deserved, but by a desperate attempt to rationalize what had just occurred in terms that preserved the team's sense of superiority. And competence. Nathan was the first to voice the denial that would characterize the next several days. Look, that was impressive shooting, I'll give her that. But let's be realistic here. Nobody shoots perfect scores on the Alpha course without some kind of advantage we don't know about. Derek found himself nodding along with Nathan's assessment, despite the evidence of his own eyes. The alternative, accepting that a civilian with a walking cane had just outperformed the military's elite snipers by a margin that bordered on the supernatural, was too threatening to his entire worldview to consider seriously. She probably had advanced knowledge of the course layout, Rachel suggested, her competitive nature unable to accept that someone had legitimately exceeded her capabilities. Maybe she studied our range procedures, memorized target positions, even practiced here when we weren't around. Zoe's analytical mind was working overtime to find explanations that didn't require acknowledging superior skill. The environmental conditions were unusually stable today. Wind patterns that are normally unpredictable were probably more consistent than usual. And at these ranges, even small variations in ammunition performance could account for apparent precision improvements. But Kevin found himself studying the targets through his spotting scope with growing confusion. Guys, I've been looking at these shot placements. They're not just good, they're mechanically perfect. Each shot is placed within millimeters of dead center. That's not luck or favorable conditions. That's a level of precision I've never seen before. Derek felt a growing sense of unease as he examined the evidence Kevin was pointing out. The shot groupings were indeed unlike anything he had witnessed in his military career. The consistency was beyond what should have been achievable with the equipment Victoria had used, and the speed of engagement suggested an understanding of ballistics that went far beyond conventional training. Maybe her rifle has some kind of modification we didn't notice, Nathan suggested, grasping for explanations that preserved his sense of superiority. Custom triggers, specialized ammunition, maybe even electronic assistance disguised as conventional equipment. Victoria had remained silent during this discussion, gathering her equipment with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout her demonstration. When she finished, she turned to address Derek directly. "Sergeant, I made you an offer. I demonstrated capabilities that exceeded your team's performance under identical conditions. Are you prepared to honor your agreement and listen to what I have to teach?" Derek felt caught between his training, which told him to seek learning opportunities wherever they might be found, and his pride, which rebelled against the idea that this unassuming woman could teach his elite team anything they didn't already know. "Ma'am, what you demonstrated today was certainly impressive. But before we discuss any training arrangements, I'd need to understand more about your background and credentials. Military records, training certifications, that sort of thing." Victoria shouldered her rifle case and picked up her walking cane, her expression showing neither surprise nor disappointment at Derek's response. "I understand your position, Sergeant. When you're ready to learn, you know where to find me." As Victoria walked away from the range, her figure gradually disappearing into the pine forest that surrounded the facility, Derek felt a growing sense that he had just made a serious mistake. But the pressure to maintain his team's confidence and his own authority made it impossible to pursue the opportunity she had offered. "Smart move, Sarge," Nathan said as they watched Victoria disappear. "We can't just accept training from some random civilian, no matter how good her shooting happened to be today." But as the team returned to their equipment maintenance and post-exercise procedures, Kevin found himself unable to concentrate on routine tasks. The image of Victoria's performance kept replaying in his mind, and the more he thought about what he had witnessed, the more convinced he became that they had just dismissed someone whose knowledge could have transformed their capabilities. That evening, while his teammates celebrated their own achievements and rationalized Victoria's performance, Kevin began researching military sniper records and veteran databases. His security clearance allowed him access to certain personnel files, and he was determined to learn more about Victoria Harrison and her claim to have served as a precision marksman. What he discovered in the first hour of searching sent chills down his spine. References to a Sergeant Victoria Harrison appeared in multiple classified documents, spanning a 12-year period from 1995 to 2007. The records were heavily redacted, but the details that remained visible painted a picture of a sniper whose combat performance had been legendary. Kevin found references to unprecedented accuracy standards and tactical capabilities exceeding conventional parameters. One document mentioned a precision marksman who had achieved target engagement success rates previously considered impossible under field conditions. Another referenced ballistic techniques that challenged established mathematical models. But it was a partially declassified after-action report from 2006 that provided the most compelling evidence. The document described an engagement in Iraq where a single sniper had neutralized 7 high-value targets at ranges exceeding 1,200 meters in less than 10 minutes, preventing an ambush that would have resulted in significant American casualties. The sniper's call sign was listed as Deadshot, and the report noted that her precision and tactical awareness represented the highest standards of military excellence. Kevin's research revealed that Victoria's military service had ended abruptly. In 2007, following what was described as injuries sustained during enemy contact. The medical records were classified, but Kevin found references to extensive rehabilitation and a medical retirement that had ended one of the most distinguished sniper careers in military history. As Kevin delved deeper into the available records, he began to understand the magnitude of what his team had just witnessed. Victoria Harrison wasn't just a veteran sniper. She was a legend whose combat achievements had been classified to protect operational security. Her demonstration at their range hadn't been an amateur showing off, but a master craftsman displaying techniques that had been developed and perfected in life or death situations. The next morning, Kevin approached Derek with his findings, hoping to convince his sergeant that they needed to reconsider their dismissal of Victoria's offer. "Sarge, I've been researching our visitor from yesterday. I think we made a serious mistake." Derek looked up from his morning equipment inspection, his expression showing irritation at having the previous day's events brought up again. "Kevin, what's done is done. We can't second-guess every decision based on impressive shooting performances." "But Sarge, she's not just some civilian. Look at these records." Kevin spread printouts across Derek's desk, highlighting the references to Victoria's military service and combat achievements. This woman is a legitimate military legend. Her combat record includes achievements that make our best performances look ordinary. Derek studied the documents Kevin had provided, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion to growing concern. The evidence was overwhelming. Victoria Harrison had served with distinction in combat roles that few soldiers ever experienced, and her marksmanship achievements had been documented by multiple military sources. "Why didn't she mention any of this yesterday?" Derek asked. "Maybe because she wanted to be judged on her demonstration rather than her reputation. Maybe she wanted to see if we were worthy of learning from her experience." As Derek absorbed the implications of Kevin's research, he began to realize that his team had just refused training from someone whose knowledge and experience exceeded their own by orders of magnitude. Victoria Harrison wasn't seeking to learn from them. She had been offering to share expertise that could have elevated their capabilities beyond anything they had imagined possible. The question now was whether it was too late to accept the gift they had so arrogantly rejected. Kevin's research into Victoria Harrison's military background became an obsession that consumed his off-duty hours for the next week. What had started as curiosity about an impressive shooting demonstration had evolved into a deep dive into classified military records that revealed a story of extraordinary service and devastating personal cost. The deeper Kevin dug, the more remarkable Victoria's military career appeared. Her service record showed rapid advancement through specialized training programs that few soldiers ever qualified for. She had completed Ranger School, Sniper School, and several classified programs whose details remained heavily redacted. Her performance evaluations consistently rated her in the top 1% of military personnel, with particular notation of her exceptional tactical awareness and unprecedented marksmanship capabilities. But it was the combat deployment records that truly revealed the scope of Victoria's achievements. Between 2003 and 2007, she had served 4 tours in Iraq as part of an elite unit designated only as Phantom Company. The unit's mission parameters were classified, but Kevin found references that suggested they specialized in high-value target elimination and reconnaissance operations in hostile territory. Kevin discovered that Victoria's call sign, Deadshot, had become legendary among special operations personnel. One partially declassified intelligence report described her as the most effective precision marksman currently deployed in theater, with confirmed eliminations at ranges that challenged the theoretical limits of sniper capabilities. Another document noted that her tactical innovations had been adopted by sniper training programs across all branches of the military. The most compelling evidence of Victoria's extraordinary abilities came from after-action reports that described specific engagements where her marksmanship had changed the outcome of critical operations. Kevin found references to a mission near Fallujah where Victoria had provided overwatch for a convoy ambush, eliminating hostile forces at ranges exceeding 1,400 meters while protecting friendly units. Another report described an urban engagement where she had neutralized 6 enemy combatants in under 3 minutes, allowing a trapped patrol to escape without casualties. But it was a heavily redacted document from 2007 that provided the most crucial information about Victoria's military service and the circumstances that had ended her career. The report described an operation designated Iron Thunder that had taken place in a contested urban area outside Baghdad. Victoria's unit had been tasked with eliminating a high-value target who was coordinating insurgent activities from a fortified compound. According to the available details, the operation had proceeded successfully until extraction, when Victoria's team had come under heavy mortar and rocket-propelled grenade fire. The document noted that Victoria had remained in position to provide covering fire for her teammates' withdrawal, despite being wounded by shrapnel from an explosion that had destroyed her primary shooting position. Kevin found medical records indicating that Victoria had sustained severe injuries to her left leg and hip, requiring multiple surgeries and extensive rehabilitation. The prognosis notes mentioned permanent mobility impairment and chronic pain management requirements that would prevent her from returning to active duty status. Her medical retirement had been processed with full honors, but Kevin could see that the transition from elite combat soldier to disabled veteran had marked the end of a career that had defined her identity for over a decade. What struck Kevin most powerfully was a fitness evaluation from Victoria's final months of active duty. Despite her injuries and obvious physical limitations, she had continued to score perfect marks on marksmanship assessments. One note from her commanding officer stated, "Sergeant Harrison's shooting capabilities remain unimpaired by her injuries. Her accuracy and tactical knowledge continue to exceed all measurable standards." Armed with this comprehensive picture of Victoria's military background, Kevin approached Derek with renewed urgency about the opportunity they had missed. "Sarge, you need to see the complete picture of who we dismissed," Kevin said, spreading the accumulated research across Derek's desk. "Victoria Harrison isn't just a veteran sniper. She's one of the most accomplished combat marksmen in military history." Derek studied the documents with growing amazement and regret. The evidence was overwhelming. Victoria's combat achievements exceeded anything his team had accomplished, and her tactical knowledge represented the kind of real-world experience that couldn't be replicated in training environments. "Kevin, this is incredible. Why didn't she tell us any of this? Maybe because she wanted to be judged on her current capabilities rather than her past reputation. Maybe she was testing whether we had the humility to recognize excellence when we saw it. Derek felt the weight of his mistake settling heavily on his shoulders. Victoria had offered to share knowledge gained through years of combat experience, and he had rejected it out of pride and prejudice about her appearance and physical limitations. "We need to find her," Derek said finally. "We need to apologize and ask if she's still willing to teach us." But Kevin had already been working on that problem. "I've been trying to locate her for the past week. She's not listed in any local directories, and the Veteran Affairs Office couldn't provide contact information due to privacy regulations." Nathan, who had been listening to their conversation, finally spoke up. "Maybe she's staying at one of the motels in town. How many places could there be?" Rachel joined the discussion, her competitive nature now focused on obtaining training that could improve her performance. "We could check with the base visitor's office. If she's been coming here regularly, they might have contact information." Zoe's technical approach was characteristically thorough. "I could run database searches for Victoria Harrison in the local area. Cross-reference vehicle registrations, property records, utility connections. Someone with her background probably values privacy, but there should be some paper trail." Derek authorized his team to use whatever resources necessary to locate Victoria, but their searches yielded no results. It was as if she had vanished as completely as she had appeared, leaving only the memory of her extraordinary demonstration and the growing realization of what they had lost. It was Zoe who finally provided the breakthrough they needed. "Sarge, I've been thinking about this wrong. Someone with Victoria's background wouldn't be staying in motels or maintaining obvious local connections. But she would need medical care for her injuries." Derek immediately understood Zoe's reasoning. The VA Medical Center. She'd need regular treatment for her service-connected disabilities. Kevin's research into Victoria's medical records had mentioned ongoing treatment requirements for her combat injuries. If she was in the area for an extended period, she would need access to veteran medical services. "I'll contact the VA center and see if they can pass along a message," Derek said. "We can't access patient information, but we might be able to get word to her that we'd like to speak with her." As Derek prepared to make what might be the most important phone call of his military career, he reflected on the lesson Victoria had already taught them without saying a word. Excellence came in many forms, and true professionals could be found in the most unexpected places. The question now was whether they would get a second chance to learn from someone whose knowledge had been earned through sacrifice. They were only beginning to understand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Derek's call to the VA Medical Center yielded unexpected results. Not only were they able to pass along his message, but Victoria herself called him back within 2 hours, her voice carrying the same calm professionalism he remembered from their encounter at the range. "Sergeant Stone, I understand you've been researching my background." Derek felt a mixture of embarrassment and hope as he responded. "Ma'am, we made a serious mistake. We'd like the opportunity to apologize in person and discuss your offer to share your knowledge with our team." Victoria agreed to meet them at a small coffee shop in the nearby town of Pine Ridge, away from the military environment where their first encounter had gone so poorly. Derek brought Kevin with him, both men arriving early and waiting nervously for Victoria to appear. When she walked through the door, Derek was struck again by how completely her appearance contradicted everything he now knew about her military achievements. The walking cane, the civilian clothes, the unremarkable demeanor, all of it concealed a warrior whose combat record exceeded that of legendary snipers, whose names were taught in military academies. Victoria settled into the booth across from them, declining Derek's offer to buy her coffee with the same quiet courtesy she had shown throughout their interactions. Before we discuss training, Victoria said without preamble, I think you should understand why I made the offer and what it costs to earn the knowledge you're asking to receive. Derek nodded, sensing that Victoria was about to share information that would provide crucial context for everything that had happened between them. My military career began in 1995 when I was 19 years old. Like most young soldiers, I thought I understood what service meant. I thought courage was about not being afraid and that skill was about individual achievement. Victoria's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. It took 12 years of combat experience to learn how wrong I was about almost everything. Kevin leaned forward, his notebook ready to capture details that might help him understand the source of Victoria's extraordinary capabilities. I was assigned to Phantom Company in 2003 during the early phase of operations in Iraq. Our mission was to provide precision elimination capabilities for high-value targets that conventional forces couldn't reach. It was elite work that required not just marksmanship skills, but the ability to operate independently in hostile territory for extended periods. Victoria paused, her eyes taking on the distant look that Derek recognized in veterans who were revisiting difficult memories. My team consisted of 4 people. Staff Sergeant Michael Chun was our team leader, a veteran of multiple deployments, who had more tactical knowledge than anyone I'd ever met. Corporal Sarah Martinez was our spotter and communications specialist, barely 22 years old, but with an intuitive understanding of battlefield dynamics that saved our lives more times than I can count. Private First Class James Wilson was our designated marksman and my shooting partner, someone whose precision matched my own and whose calm under fire made him the most reliable soldier I'd ever served with. Derek could hear the affection and respect in Victoria's voice as she described her teammates, but he also detected an undercurrent of pain that suggested their story didn't end well. For 3.5 years, we operated as a unit. 47 successful missions, 127 confirmed eliminations, 0 friendly casualties. We developed techniques and procedures that pushed the boundaries of what sniper teams were thought capable of achieving. The ballistic calculations, environmental adaptations, and tactical innovations that allowed me to shoot perfect scores on your course. Yesterday, all of that knowledge was developed through trial and error with my team, under conditions where mistakes meant death. Victoria pulled out a photograph from her jacket pocket, its edges worn from years of handling. Derek could see 4 soldiers in combat gear, their faces bright with the confidence of professionals who had learned to trust each other completely. Michael taught me that leadership meant taking responsibility for outcomes, not just giving orders. Sarah showed me that intelligence gathering and communication were more important than individual shooting skills. James proved that partnership and mutual support could achieve results that no single person could accomplish alone. Derek studied the photograph, noting the obvious camaraderie and professionalism of the team. These weren't just soldiers who worked together. They were a family forged by shared danger and mutual dependence. What happened to them? Kevin asked quietly. Victoria's expression darkened, and Derek could see the pain that she had carried for 15 years beginning to surface. Operation Iron Thunder was supposed to be a routine elimination mission. High-value target in an urban compound, standard approach and extraction procedures. Intelligence indicated minimal hostile presence and clear extraction routes. Everything we had learned to expect from a low-risk operation. Victoria's voice began to carry the strain of revisiting traumatic memories. The target elimination went perfectly. James and I provided overwatch while Michael and Sarah moved to confirm the kill and gather intelligence. Standard procedures, executed flawlessly. But the intelligence was wrong about the hostile presence. Derek felt his stomach tighten as he anticipated what was coming. The compound was a trap. As soon as Michael and Sarah entered the building, we came under coordinated fire from multiple positions. RPGs, mortar, automatic weapons, a full-scale ambush designed to eliminate our entire team. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she continued her account. Michael and Sarah were pinned down inside the compound with no way to reach the extraction point. James and I were in overwatch positions 800 meters away, taking fire from enemies who had triangulated our location. The extraction helicopter couldn't land under those conditions, and air support was 20 minutes away. Kevin could see tears forming in Victoria's eyes as she reached the climax of her story. I had a choice: follow doctrine and wait for air support while my teammates died, or violate every safety protocol and create enough chaos to give them a chance to escape. Derek already knew from Kevin's research how that choice had ended, but hearing it from Victoria herself made the sacrifice real in a way that military reports never could. I left my protected position and moved to within 400 meters of the compound, taking sniper fire the entire way. From that position, I could engage the enemy forces that had Michael and Sarah trapped, but it meant exposing myself to return fire from multiple directions. Victoria's voice broke slightly as she continued. I killed 11 enemy combatants in 7 minutes, giving Michael and Sarah the suppression they needed to reach the extraction point. But the moment they were clear, an RPG took out my position. James tried to reach me, tried to provide covering fire for my extraction. Victoria stopped speaking, the weight of the memory making it impossible to continue for several moments. James died trying to save me. Michael and Sarah made it to the helicopter, but James took a sniper's bullet while running across open ground to reach my position. He died believing he could get me out alive. Derek felt the full weight of Victoria's sacrifice settling over him like a physical presence. This wasn't just a war story. It was an account of loyalty, courage, and loss that had defined everything. Victoria had become the explosion that killed James left me with the injuries that ended my career. But the real damage wasn't to my leg. It was losing 3 people who had trusted me to make the right decisions, who had followed me into situations where my choices determined whether they lived or died. Victoria looked directly at Derek, her eyes carrying 15 years of survivors, guilt, and unanswered questions. So when I offer to teach you the techniques my team died perfecting, I'm not just sharing military knowledge. I'm asking if you're worthy of carrying forward the sacrifice that bought that knowledge, and whether you understand that true skill is never about individual achievement. It's about what you're willing to risk to protect the people who depend on you. The coffee shop fell silent as Victoria's words settled over Derek and Kevin like a weight they weren't sure they could bear. Derek felt the full magnitude of his team's failure crystallizing in his mind. They hadn't just dismissed an impressive shooting demonstration. They had mocked a woman whose knowledge had been purchased with the lives of soldiers who had trusted her leadership. "Ma'am," Derek said, his voice heavy with shame, "we had no idea. Our behavior was inexcusable." Victoria studied Derek's face, looking for something deeper than simple embarrassment. "Sergeant Stone, ignorance of my background doesn't excuse your team's reaction. What bothers me isn't that you didn't know who I was. It's that you saw a middle-aged woman with a walking cane and immediately assumed she had nothing to offer you." Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, recognizing the accuracy of Victoria's assessment. "Ma'am, you're absolutely right. We prejudged you based on appearance and preconceptions about what a skilled marksman should look like. But more than that," Victoria continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak difficult truths. "Your team's reaction revealed something about your character that concerns me more than your tactical limitations." Derek felt a chill as he recognized that Victoria's evaluation went far beyond their marksmanship capabilities. She was questioning their worthiness as soldiers and as human beings. "What do you mean?" Derek asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I mean that true military excellence isn't about individual achievement or competitive superiority. It's about recognizing value wherever it exists, learning from anyone who has knowledge to share, And understanding that the moment you think you've learned everything there is to know is the moment you become dangerous to the people who depend on you. Victoria pulled out her phone and showed Derek a photograph that made his stomach drop. It was a picture of Nathan, Rachel, and Zoe taken during their range time, captured from a distance but clearly showing them laughing and making jokes as Victoria had walked away after her demonstration. I watched your team's reaction after I left. I saw the mockery, the dismissal, the assumption that my performance was somehow fraudulent or meaningless. That reaction tells me everything I need to know about your readiness to receive the knowledge my teammates died protecting. Derek felt anger at his team's behavior, mixing with shame at his own failure to control their responses. Ma'am, I take full responsibility for my team's conduct. Their behavior was unprofessional and disrespectful. Sergeant Stone, taking responsibility, is admirable, but it doesn't change what happened or what it reveals about your unit's culture. The question now is whether you and your team have the character to change that culture, or whether you're content to remain skilled technicians who mistake individual competence for true military excellence. Kevin leaned forward, recognizing that this conversation represented a crucial moment in their development as soldiers. Ma'am, what would it take to prove that we're capable of change? Victoria's expression softened slightly, and Derek caught a glimpse of the instructor she might become if they could demonstrate worthiness of her knowledge. First, your entire team needs to understand what they witnessed and why their reaction was unacceptable. Not because I'm a veteran or because my combat record demands respect, but because their prejudices and assumptions blinded them to an opportunity to learn from someone with knowledge they needed. Derek nodded, already planning the difficult conversation he would need to have with Nathan, Rachel, and Zoe about their behavior and its implications. Second, you need to understand that the techniques I can teach you weren't developed in classroom environments or on training ranges. They were created under conditions where failure meant watching your teammates die. If you want to learn these methods, you need to accept the responsibility that comes with that knowledge. Victoria's voice carried the weight of 15 years of survivor's guilt as she continued. The ballistic calculations that allowed me to shoot perfect scores on your course weren't just mathematical formulas. They were lessons written in blood by soldiers who died trusting me to use their sacrifice to save other lives. When I teach you these techniques, I'm passing on a sacred trust that you'll use them to protect people who can't protect themselves. Derek felt the enormity of what Victoria was offering settling over him like a mantle he wasn't sure he was worthy to wear. Third, you need to prove that you understand the difference between skill and wisdom. Skill is about hitting targets and following procedures. Wisdom is about knowing when to take risks that others won't take, when to trust your teammates completely, and when to sacrifice your own safety for something more important than individual survival. Kevin was taking notes, but Derek could see that the young soldier was beginning to understand that this wasn't about military tactics. It was about fundamental questions of character and purpose. Finally, Victoria said, her voice carrying a finality that made both men understand they were approaching a decision point. You need to convince me that you're willing to carry forward not just the techniques my team developed, but the values they died defending. Michael, Sarah, and James didn't sacrifice themselves for military objectives or strategic goals. They died protecting each other and the idea that some things are worth risking everything to preserve. Derek felt the weight of judgment settling over him as Victoria studied his face with the same careful attention she had brought to her shooting demonstration. Ma'am, how do we prove that we're worthy of what you're offering? Victoria stood up from the booth, reaching for her walking cane with movements that reminded Derek of the physical cost she continued to pay for her service. You start by having an honest conversation with your team about what they witnessed and what their reaction revealed about their character. You help them understand that the most dangerous enemy any soldier faces isn't enemy fire or tactical challenges. It's the arrogance that makes you think you already know everything you Need to know. Derek and Kevin stood as well, both men recognizing that this conversation was ending, but hoping that it wasn't their final chance to learn from Victoria's experience. If your team can demonstrate genuine humility and a commitment to learning from their mistakes, then we can discuss training arrangements. But if they continue to believe that their current capabilities represent the pinnacle of marksmanship achievement, then they're not ready for the knowledge I'm offering. Victoria headed toward the coffee shop exit, then paused to deliver one final challenge. Sergeant Stone, the choice is yours. You can continue training soldiers who are technically proficient, but fundamentally limited by their own prejudices and assumptions. Or you can help them become the kind of warriors who understand that true excellence comes from recognizing value wherever it exists and learning from anyone who has knowledge worth sharing. As Victoria disappeared into the afternoon crowd, Derek felt the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders in a way he had never experienced before. The conversation ahead with his team would determine not just their tactical capabilities, but their worth as soldiers and as human beings. The question now was whether Nathan, Rachel, and Zoe had the humility to acknowledge their failures and the character to change their fundamental approach to military service. Everything else, their skills, their records, their reputation, would be meaningless if they couldn't pass this most basic test of military professionalism. Derek returned to base that evening with the weight of Victoria's words pressing heavily on his conscience. The conversation he needed to have with his team would be one of the most difficult of his military career, requiring him to confront not just their behavior, but the culture of arrogance and superiority that he had allowed to develop within his unit. He called the team together in the briefing room after evening chow, their faces showing curiosity about the unusual timing, but no awareness of the reckoning that was about to unfold. I need to discuss what happened during Victoria Harrison's visit to our range, Derek began, his voice carrying an authority that immediately captured their attention. Specifically, I need to address your behavior and what it revealed about your character as soldiers. Nathan's expression shifted to defensiveness. Sarge, we were professional during the demonstration. Maybe we were skeptical, but that's reasonable when some random civilian shows up claiming they can outshoot trained military snipers. Derek felt his anger rising at Nathan's continued dismissal of Victoria's demonstration, but he forced himself to maintain the calm professionalism that the situation required. Corporal Blake, Victoria Harrison isn't a random civilian. She's a combat veteran whose marksmanship achievements exceeded anything our team has ever accomplished. Her call sign was Deadshot, and her combat record includes 127 confirmed eliminations. Over 12 years of active duty. The room fell silent as the implications of Derek's words began to sink in. Zoe was the first to speak, her voice showing the first hints of understanding. Sarge, are you saying she's actually a veteran sniper? I'm saying she's one of the most accomplished combat marksmen in military history. Her unit, Phantom Company, conducted 47 successful missions in Iraq, with 0 friendly casualties until the operation that ended her career. Rachel's competitive nature made her focus on the tactical implications. If that's true, then her demonstration wasn't just impressive shooting. It was a master class in techniques we've never even heard of. Derek nodded, feeling some hope that his team might be capable of understanding the magnitude of their failure. Kevin has spent the past week researching Victoria's background. Kevin, share what you've learned. Kevin pulled out his research files and began detailing Victoria's military achievements, her unit's mission parameters, and the circumstances that had ended her career. As he spoke, Derek watched his team's expressions shift from skepticism to amazement, to grow in shame as they realized what they had dismissed and mocked. So when she offered to teach us, Nathan said slowly, she was offering to share techniques developed in actual combat by one of the military's most elite units. That's correct. And your response was to mock her appearance, dismiss her capabilities, and assume she had nothing to offer soldiers of your caliber. The weight of their failure was beginning to settle over the team like a physical presence. Zoe was studying her tablet, but Derek could see that she was struggling with emotions rather than calculations. "Sarge," Zoe said quietly, "we treated a combat veteran like she was some kind of joke. We laughed at someone who's done things we can't even imagine." Derek felt encouraged by Zoe's recognition of their failure, but he knew that understanding their mistake was only the first step toward redemption. The problem wasn't just that you misjudged Victoria's capabilities. The problem was that you allowed prejudice and arrogance to blind you to an opportunity to learn from someone whose knowledge could have made you better soldiers and better people. Rachel, who had remained silent during most of the discussion, finally spoke up. "Sarge, how do we fix this? How do we prove that we're better than our worst behavior?" Derek felt a surge of hope at Rachel's question, recognizing it as the first genuine expression of humility he had heard from his team. "Victoria has agreed to consider training us, but only if we can demonstrate that we've learned from our mistakes and developed the character to receive the knowledge she's offering." Nathan leaned forward, his usual arrogance replaced by something approaching respect. "What kind of demonstration?" Derek pulled out the notes he had taken during his conversation with Victoria, recognizing that her requirements represented a fundamental challenge to everything his team thought they knew about military excellence. "First, you need to understand that the techniques she can teach us weren't developed in safe training environments. They were created under combat conditions where failure meant watching teammates die. If we want to learn these methods, we need to accept the responsibility that comes with that knowledge." Kevin nodded, his research having given him insight into the cost of Victoria's expertise. "She's not just teaching us how to shoot better. She's asking us to carry forward the legacy of soldiers who died perfecting these techniques. Second," Derek continued, "we need to prove that we understand the difference between individual skill and team excellence. Victoria's achievements weren't about personal superiority. They were about what she was willing to sacrifice to protect her teammates and complete missions that seemed impossible." Zoe looked up from her tablet, her analytical mind beginning to grasp the deeper implications of Victoria's offer. "So this isn't really about marksmanship training. It's about becoming the kind of soldiers who put mission accomplishment and team welfare above personal recognition." Derek felt genuine pride in his team for the first time since Victoria's initial visit. Their recognition of the deeper meaning behind her offer suggested they might indeed be capable of the character development she required. "Finally, Victoria wants to see evidence that we can recognize value wherever it exists, regardless of whether it matches our preconceptions about what expertise should look like. She wants us to prove that we won't make the same mistake again with other people who might have knowledge to share." The room fell silent as each team member contemplated the challenge Victoria had set before them. Derek could see them wrestling with fundamental questions about their identity as soldiers and their readiness to learn from someone whose experience exceeded their own. Nathan was the first to speak, his voice carrying a humility that Derek had never heard before. "Sarge, I need to ask Victoria for her forgiveness. What I said to her was disrespectful and unprofessional, and it reflected poorly on our entire unit." Rachel nodded in agreement. "We all do. We treated someone who deserved our respect like she was beneath our notice. That's not who I want to be as a soldier or as a person." Zoe closed her tablet and looked directly at Derek. "Sarge, whatever it takes to prove we're worthy of her training, I'm ready to do it. I want to learn from someone who's actually used these skills to save lives." Kevin added his own commitment to the team's newfound resolve. "Victoria asked if we're willing to carry forward the sacrifice that bought this knowledge. I think we need to prove that we understand what that sacrifice means." Derek felt a mixture of pride and trepidation as he recognized that his team was beginning to grasp the true nature of Victoria's challenge. They were starting to understand that becoming worthy of her training would require fundamental changes in their character, not just their shooting techniques. "All right," Derek said. "Tomorrow we're going to contact Victoria and ask for the opportunity to prove that we've learned from our mistakes. But understand this, she's not just going to test our marksmanship. She's going to evaluate our character, our humility, and our commitment to becoming the kind of soldiers who honor the sacrifice of those who came before us." As his team prepared to leave the briefing room, Derek felt cautiously optimistic about their chances for redemption. The humility they had shown during their conversation suggested they might indeed be capable of the character development Victoria required. The question now was whether they could demonstrate that growth when it mattered most. Victoria's response to Derek's request for a second chance was characteristically direct and uncompromising. She agreed to meet the team at the range, but made it clear that this would be their final opportunity to prove worthy of the knowledge she was offering. "Sergeant Stone," Victoria said when Derek called to arrange the meeting, "I want your team to understand that this isn't going to be a conventional training exercise. I'm not interested in improving their shooting scores or teaching them advanced techniques until I'm convinced they have the character to use that knowledge responsibly." Derek felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety as he gathered his team at the range the following morning. Nathan, Rachel, Zoe, and Kevin had spent the previous evening discussing their approach to the encounter, each recognizing that their behavior would determine not just their opportunity for advanced training, but their worth as soldiers and human beings. Victoria arrived precisely at the scheduled time, her walking cane and unremarkable appearance unchanged from their first encounter. But this time, Derek's team saw her differently. Instead of dismissing her based on preconceptions, they recognized her as a combat veteran whose achievements exceeded their own and whose knowledge had been earned through sacrifice they were only beginning to understand. Nathan was the first to approach Victoria, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine respect and remorse. "Ma'am," Nathan said, his voice carrying a humility that his teammates had never heard before, "I owe you an apology. My behavior during your first visit was disrespectful and unprofessional. I judged you based on appearance and assumptions, and I failed to recognize that you had knowledge and experience that could make me a better soldier." Victoria studied Nathan's face, looking for evidence of genuine understanding rather than simple embarrassment at being caught in poor behavior. "Corporal Blake, what specifically are you apologizing for?" Nathan met her eyes directly, recognizing that Victoria's question required him to confront the specific nature of his failure. "I'm apologizing for mocking your walking cane, for assuming you had nothing to offer based on your appearance, and for treating a combat veteran with disrespect. But mostly I'm apologizing for the arrogance that made me think I already knew everything I needed to know about marksmanship." Rachel stepped forward next, her competitive nature now focused on earning Victoria's respect rather than defending her own superiority. "Ma'am, I need to apologize as well. I was so focused on protecting our training time and maintaining our performance standards that I failed to recognize an opportunity to learn from someone whose experience exceeded our own. That was short-sighted and unprofessional." Zoe approached with her tablet closed, symbolically setting aside the technology she had previously relied on to demonstrate her expertise. "Ma'am, I apologize for dismissing your capabilities and for assuming that my technical knowledge was more valuable than your combat experience. I realize now that real marksmanship isn't just about calculations and equipment. It's about the wisdom that comes from using those skills when lives depend on accuracy." Kevin, who had been the most respectful during their initial encounter, offered his own commitment to learning. "Ma'am, I want to learn not just your techniques, but the values and principles that guided your service. I understand that the knowledge your offering was earned through sacrifice, and I want to prove worthy of carrying that legacy forward." Victoria listened to each apology with the same careful attention she brought to everything else, evaluating not just their words but their sincerity and understanding of what they were asking to receive. "Your apologies are accepted," Victoria said finally. "But words are easy to offer and difficult to sustain under pressure. The question now is whether you can demonstrate the character development you're claiming to have achieved." Derek felt his pulse quicken as he recognized that Victoria was about to present them with a test that would determine their worthiness for advanced training. "The techniques I developed with my team weren't just about individual marksmanship," Victoria continued. "They were about trust, sacrifice, and the willingness to risk everything for something more important than personal survival. If you want to learn these methods, you need to prove you understand those principles." Victoria walked to the equipment table and began setting up a training scenario unlike anything Derek's team had ever encountered. Instead of traditional targets at measured distances, she arranged a complex urban warfare simulation that required teamwork, communication, and split-second decision-making under pressure. "This exercise isn't about hitting targets," Victoria explained as she positioned mannequins representing civilians among the hostile targets. "It's about making the right choices when success requires risking your own safety to protect others." The scenario Victoria had created presented an impossible choice: engage multiple hostile targets while avoiding civilian casualties, but do so from positions that would expose the shooters to return fire. Success required not just marksmanship skills, but the willingness to accept personal risk for mission accomplishment. Nathan studied the setup, recognizing that conventional tactics would result in either civilian casualties or unacceptable risk. To his team, "Ma'am, this scenario seems designed to test our decision-making under pressure rather than our shooting skills." Victoria nodded approvingly at Nathan's observation. "Exactly. Combat marksmanship isn't about perfect scores on qualification courses. It's about making shots that matter under conditions where failure has consequences beyond personal embarrassment." Derek realized that Victoria was presenting them with the same type of impossible choices that had defined her combat experience. The techniques she was offering to teach weren't just about improved accuracy. They were about developing the judgment and courage to use those skills when everything was at stake. "Your team will run this scenario repeatedly until you can complete it successfully," Victoria announced. "But success isn't measured by target hits or time to completion. Success is measured by your willingness to risk personal safety to protect others and by your ability to work as a team under extreme pressure." Rachel examined the civilian mannequins positioned throughout the scenario, understanding that any shot placement errors could result in simulated friendly casualties. "Ma'am, this is exactly the type of situation where advanced techniques would be most valuable. Shots that seem impossible with conventional methods might be achievable with the skills you developed." Victoria's expression showed the first hint of approval Derek had seen since their reunion. "Private Turner, you're beginning to understand why these techniques exist. They weren't developed to win competitions or set range records. They were created to solve tactical problems that conventional methods couldn't address." As Victoria began explaining the specific requirements for the exercise, Derek felt his team's excitement building. This wasn't just training, it was an opportunity to learn from someone whose knowledge had been tested under the most demanding conditions possible. But he also understood that Victoria's real test wasn't about their shooting skills. It was about whether they had developed the character to use advanced capabilities responsibly, with full understanding of the sacrifice that had purchased that knowledge and the responsibility that came with carrying it forward. The training that was about to begin would determine not just their technical capabilities, but their worth as inheritors of a legacy written in blood by soldiers who had trusted each other completely and sacrificed everything for something greater than individual survival. 6 weeks later, Derek stood at the same observation post where he had first dismissed Victoria Harrison as an irrelevant interruption to his team's training. The transformation that had occurred during those weeks went far beyond improved marksmanship, scores, or advanced tactical techniques. His team had been fundamentally changed by their exposure to someone whose knowledge had been earned through sacrifice. They were only beginning to understand. Victoria's training program had pushed them beyond every limit they thought they possessed. The techniques she taught weren't just about improved accuracy or advanced ballistic calculations. They were about developing the judgment, courage, and selflessness that separated true warriors from skilled technicians. Nathan had emerged from the training as a marksman whose capabilities exceeded his previous achievements by orders of magnitude. But more importantly, he had developed the humility to recognize that skill without character was meaningless. His arrogance had been replaced by quiet confidence and a deep respect for the knowledge that had been entrusted to him. "Sarge," Nathan said as he completed his final qualification exercise, "I want to understand something. Victoria could have taught these techniques to any unit in the military. Why did she choose us?" Derek considered Nathan's question carefully, recognizing that the answer revealed something important about Victoria's mission and their responsibility as her students. "I think she chose us because we failed her initial test so completely. We represented everything that was wrong with military training that focuses on individual achievement instead of character development. She saw an opportunity to prove that even soldiers who had lost their way could be redeemed if they were willing to confront their failures honestly." Rachel nodded in agreement, her competitive nature now focused on honoring the legacy Victoria had entrusted to them rather than simply outperforming her peers. Victoria didn't just teach us how to shoot better. She taught us why accuracy matters, when to take risks that others won't take, and how to trust teammates completely even when everything is at stake. Zoe had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation of anyone on the team. Her reliance on technology and calculations had been supplemented by an intuitive understanding of ballistics and environmental factors that came from internalizing knowledge rather than simply accessing data. "Ma'am," Zoe said as Victoria approached to observe their final exercise, "the techniques you've taught us aren't just about marksmanship. They're about becoming the kind of soldiers who can succeed when conventional methods fail." Victoria watched the team's final demonstration with the same careful attention she had brought to their initial evaluation. But this time Derek could see satisfaction in her expression as she observed soldiers who had learned to balance individual skill with team coordination, technical expertise with tactical judgment, and personal ambition with selfless service. Kevin had proven to be Victoria's most intuitive student, developing an understanding of advanced techniques that suggested natural aptitude for the kind of combat marksmanship that had made Phantom Company legendary. "Ma'am," Kevin said as he completed a series of shots that would have been impossible 6 weeks earlier, "I want to make sure I understand the responsibility that comes with this knowledge. These techniques were developed by your teammates who died trusting you to use their sacrifice to save other lives." Victoria's expression softened with something approaching pride as she recognized that Kevin had grasped the deeper meaning behind everything she had taught them. "Private Park, you understand correctly. Michael, Sarah, and James didn't die for military objectives or strategic goals. They died protecting each other and the idea that some knowledge is worth preserving because it can save lives in situations where conventional methods fail." Derek felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as he recognized that Victoria's training was coming to an end, and that his team would soon be trusted to carry forward knowledge that had been purchased with blood. "Ma'am, how do we ensure that we're worthy of what you've taught us?" Victoria shouldered her walking cane and began gathering her equipment, her movements showing the same methodical precision that had characterized everything about her approach to training. "You ensure worthiness by remembering that these techniques exist to protect people who can't protect themselves. You honor my teammates' sacrifice by using this knowledge responsibly and by teaching others the values that made their sacrifice meaningful." Nathan stepped forward, his transformation from arrogant competitor to humble student representing the kind of character development that Victoria had demanded from all of them. "Ma'am, will you continue training other units? Will you share this knowledge with soldiers who might need it?" Victoria's smile carried a mixture of satisfaction and sadness as she contemplated the question. My mission was never to train as many soldiers as possible. It was to find students worthy of carrying forward what my team died protecting. You've proven that you understand not just the techniques, but the values and principles that make those techniques meaningful. Rachel approached Victoria with obvious reluctance to see their training relationship end. "Ma'am, how do we stay connected to the legacy you've shared with us? How do we make sure we never forget the sacrifice that made this knowledge possible?" Victoria pulled out the worn photograph of Phantom Company that Derek had seen during their first serious conversation. This time, however, she handed it to Derek with instructions that made the weight of their responsibility clear. "Sergeant Stone, I want you to keep this photograph in your office. When you train future snipers, when you face impossible tactical situations, when you're tempted to believe that individual skill is more important than character development, I want you to remember Michael, Sarah, and James. Remember that they trusted me to use their sacrifice to make future soldiers better prepared for situations where lives depend on accuracy." Derek accepted the photograph with hands that trembled slightly as he recognized the honor and responsibility Victoria was entrusting to him. "Ma'am, we won't let you down. We won't let them down." Victoria began walking toward the range exit, her figure gradually receding into the pine forest that surrounded Camp Ridgemont. But this time, Derek felt no sense of loss or missed opportunity. Victoria had given them everything they needed to carry forward the legacy of Phantom Company, and they had proven worthy of receiving that gift. As Victoria disappeared into the distance, Derek turned to address his team one final time as their instructor. "Listen carefully, because this is the most important thing you'll ever learn as soldiers. What Victoria taught us wasn't just about improved marksmanship or advanced tactical techniques. She taught us that true military excellence comes from recognizing value wherever it exists, learning from anyone who has knowledge to share, and understanding that the most dangerous enemy any soldier faces is the arrogance that makes you think you already know everything you need to know." Nathan, Rachel, Zoe, and Kevin stood at attention, their expressions showing the respect and understanding that had replaced their initial dismissiveness. From this day forward, whenever someone approaches our range, regardless of their appearance, their age, their physical limitations, or their apparent credentials, we will treat them with the respect that every person deserves until they prove unworthy of that respect. Derek looked out at the targets Victoria had used for her impossible demonstration, now preserved as a permanent reminder of the lesson she had taught them. Because legends don't always look like what we expect them to look like. Sometimes they're middle-aged women with walking canes who carry knowledge that can save lives if we're humble enough to recognize its value. The wind whispered across the mountain range, carrying with it the promise that Victoria's legacy would live on in soldiers who had learned that true strength comes not from individual achievement, but from the courage to learn, the wisdom to listen, and the character to honor those who came before. And somewhere in the distance, a woman with a walking cane smiled to herself, knowing that Michael, Sarah, and James could finally rest in peace, their sacrifice preserved in the hearts and minds of soldiers worthy of carrying their legacy forward into an uncertain future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.